To start off, let me reiterate what I said in the last video. No, Mystery Science Theater is not a forgotten TV show. What I'm talking about is the movies that would be forgotten if not for Mystery Science Theater. I did the Joel years and now the Mike years. So after Joel left to do the TV wheel, Mike took over as host. He was already the lead writer and occasionally got in front of the camera playing various characters like Torgo. While Joel had a charm and great comedic timing, Mike had a very disarming wit. I've always personally gravitated more towards Mike. He just shares more of my sense of humor. So let's look at some of the best movies that were rediscovered during the Mike years. The Giant Spider Invasion. A meteor crashes into a small town in Wisconsin which opens a black hole. Mutant alien spiders and huge puppets start pouring through the black hole and begin to take over the town. The movie was directed by Bill Rebaine on a budget of around $320,000. The two writers for the film, Richard Huff and Robert Eastman, couldn't agree on anything, so by the time they were ready to shoot, they didn't have a proper script. So Rebaine just shot the movie without one. The writers gave the actors pages of dialogue, and each day they kinda made everything up as they went along. They had no idea where they would go next. The cast was mostly industry veterans, so they were able to adapt to whatever was thrown at them. They didn't really have the budget for the special effects, and they weren't supposed to have any giant spiders. However, one of the producers insisted they needed some huge spiders since the name of the film was The Giant Spider Invasion. He said, "I want one that's bigger than Jaws." They built a giant spider and fitted it over a VW Bug as a way to move it around. Looked more like a parade float than a monster. The movie hit theaters on October 24th, 1975. According to Rebaine, this little indie film went on to gross over $15 million. After that, it was shown on network television before being buried. The movie resurfaced on Mystery Science Theater episode 10 of season 8, which aired May 31st, 1997. It became a favorite with frequent jokes about the Packers winning the Super Bowl.
Packers won the Super Bowl! Packers! Woo!
Mike and the Bots lovingly trashed the film, and this made its way back to the director. Initially, he didn't get it, but once he saw how much fun they had with it, he came around. In May of 2005, there was the Bill Rebaine Film Festival, which took place in Madison, Wisconsin. The hosts of the fest were Mike Nelson and Kevin Murphy. They said that even though they mocked this and Monster A Go-Go, they admired the director's ability to get these movies made. In a later interview, Rebaine said The Giant Spider Invasion was one of the most pirated movies in history. He didn't really mind it though, because apparently, the movie raked in millions of dollars over the years, and he saw none of it. The movie was released on DVD in 2002, and then the director's cut was released in 2009. In June of 2015, a print of the film was released on Blu-ray by VCI. Then again in 2020, the film was restored from the original 35mm camera negative and released on Blu-ray by Dark Force Entertainment. The Final Sacrifice. Canadian exploitation films, or Canucksploitation, started way back in 1974 due to a new regulation that was intended to kickstart the Canadian film industry. I spoke about this in much greater detail in my video for Happy Birthday to Me. Anyway, The Final Sacrifice is a 1990 horror film from director Jardis Gradanus. I consulted with an actual Canadian for this pronunciation, so if I'm saying it wrong, go yell at him. This was a tiny-budgeted indie film that was shot by a first-time director who was still in film school at the time. The whole thing had a budget of around $1,500 Canadian. He shot the film using equipment on loan from the school and filmed it in areas around Alberta, Canada. There wasn't too much info about whether or not this had a theatrical release. It most likely played in drive-ins as a double feature. It was later released on VHS and Laserdisc as Quest for the Lost City. It was distributed in the US by AIP. While it made the rounds at video stores, over time it was buried with countless other films. That is until June 25th, 1998, episode 10 of season 9. The movie became a beloved staple of Mystery Science Theater lore, with the heroic Zap Rousdower asking questions like, "Is there beer on the sun?" Rousdower became known as the Canadian Chuck Norris. After graduating film school, the director moved on to direct almost exclusively documentaries for various other films. On kind of a down note, the director wasn't too happy with the Mystery Science Theater treatment. I wonder if he views it as detrimental to his now more serious work. Whatever the case, this is one of those times where the creator is not happy about his movie resurfacing. This is essentially a $1,500 student film that, if not for Mystery Science Theater, no one would know about it. Santa Claus. You like your Christmas movies weird? How about a Mexican film where Santa Claus has to fight the devil? The film was from Mexican director René Cardona Sr., a director who made almost 150 films in his 57-year career. His work has made a large contribution to what is considered the golden age of Mexican cinema. Although this is not one of those films. René Cardona Sr. is the father of director René Cardona Jr., who gave us such wonderful exploitation films like The Bermuda Triangle, Cyclone, and the incredible Jawsploitation film Tintorera. In 1959, Cardona Sr. directed this fever dream of a Christmas film. It's about Santa Claus prepping for Christmas while the devil instructs his chief underling Pitch to go to Earth and ruin Santa's plans, which in turn will make all the children hate Santa Claus and worship the devil. It's a bizarre film that was released in Mexico in 1959 and got a slightly wider release about a year later when it was dubbed into English and released in the US. The movie was apparently a financial success. It was replayed well into the 70s. It became a holiday staple on TV, with several different stations bringing it back year after year. In 1992, the film went into the public domain and Mystery Science Theater picked it up. Episode 21 of Season 5. It aired December 24th, 1993. Audiences loved it, with the bizarre choreographed dances in hell to the demon Pitch being tortured with the thought of having to eat chocolate ice cream. Not to mention the horror of the mechanical reindeer. It was later released on DVD, and in 2011, it got a Blu-ray release from VCI. In 2014, RiffTrax riffed the movie with all new jokes for that year's RiffTrax Live Christmas special. Since the movie was in the public domain, it most likely would have ended up in various DVD compilations, but never would have had the visibility it has now because of Mystery Science Theater. Colonus. Colonus the Parts Horror was directed by Robert Fiveson. It's about a colony of people living in isolation that are unknowingly being kept alive as a source of replacement organs for rich people. The movie had a small release, and being that it was made for well under $1 million, they made their money back. Although, like many other small indie films from the time, it sort of faded into obscurity. So move ahead to June 7th, 1997, episode 11 of season 8. Colonus the Parts Horror made its Mystery Science Theater debut. It received a lot of attention, and while the episode was funny, the quality of the movie was a good bit higher than many of the other films they covered. Then in 2005, the movie The Island was released. Fans of Colonus immediately noticed the similarities. The thing was, many of them who knew Colonus knew of it because of Mystery Science Theater. A fan contacted Fiveson and told him that this big movie ripped off his movie. Initially, he wasn't going to do anything about it, but after some prompting, he sued the production company DreamWorks. DreamWorks, being a major studio, then did everything they could to bully the director into dropping the suit. In 2006, the court ruled there was enough evidence for this to go to trial. The fan who had initially contacted Fiveson was brought in as an advisor. The fan was also a film editor, and he put together a video that had a staggering 103 points of striking similarities between the two films. This was the nail in the coffin of the case. The judge saw the video and ruled there was case to answer. DreamWorks tried to object, but there was no grounds. As such, they realized that if a jury saw this, there was no way they would be able to win the lawsuit, so they decided to settle for a few reasons. Number one, it was cheaper and faster just to make a payout now than having this go to court. And two, if this went to court and they lost, which they absolutely would have, the entire case would have been made public, and major Hollywood players like Bay and Spielberg would have been labeled as thieves. By settling out of court, they were able to make everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement, so this whole thing would quietly go away. DreamWorks paid Fiveson an undisclosed amount rumored to be in the millions of dollars. If you'd like to see a more in-depth version of this story, check out my Colonus vs. The Island video, where I break down all the similarities between the two features. Colonus was released on DVD, and later, the Mystery Science Theater version was released by Rhino. This release included an interview with Fiveson discussing the movie being on Mystery Science Theater. The director said initially he was hesitant about them mocking the movie, but after about 5 minutes, he got into it and enjoyed what they did. He said he was honored that they chose his movie.
And who am I not to be laughed at? I mean, come on. Life's too short not to laugh at anything. So Actually, at the end of the day, I was very honored.
Space Mutiny. Space Mutiny was a joint South African-American co-production from 1988. It was created by David Winters, who was originally going to direct until tragedy struck. On day one of filming, he found out his father had died. He passed his directorial duties to his first AD, Neil Sundstrom. This created legal problems. The investors of the film had signed on because of Winters, a very well-established producer, actor, and director. Since he was directing, they agreed to fund the film only if he was at the helm. Fearing litigation, they had Sundstrom direct, but left Winters' name attached. Not liking what was done to his film, Winters has since disowned it, and later came out and said he had very little to do with the released version. The movie had a small theatrical release and later made its way to cable. On November 8, 1997, a little over a decade since it hit theaters, Space Mutiny aired on Mystery Science Theater as episode 20 of season 8. Mike and the Bots covered the film and goofed on all things Reb. It was the perfect movie for Mystery Science Theater. It's bad, but in a fun way.
Well, anyway, got that out of my system.
Roll fizzle beef.
Reb was gifted names like Blast Hard Cheese and Big McLarge Huge. Bill Corbett said this was one of the movies that stood out from that season. Really fun and dumb. Revisiting the film, on June 14th, 2018, Riff Tracks did the movie for Riff Tracks Live with a slew of new jokes. Thanks to Mystery Science Theater for introducing a new generation to the joys of Reb Brown. So that's the rest of the 5 classic films that were resurrected thanks to Mystery Science Theater. As for why I'm not doing a part 3, I like Jonah and Emily fine, but their stuff just doesn't hold up like the classics. Perhaps 35 years from now, their episodes will be looked upon as fondly as these old ones. On a complete aside, I started doing this way before I knew they were doing a Kickstarter for another season. I wish them all the best of luck, but personally, I feel the new series has kinda lost its way, which is one of the reasons the Kickstarter failed, but that's a whole other video. I had a big thing written, but I'll sum it up with this. Mystery Science Theater, at its best, should be a shoestring budget. The draw of Mystery Science Theater will always be, and I stress this, making jokes about bad old movies. Anyway, classic Mystery Science Theater 3000 breathes new life into bad movies. Mystery Science Theater was a staple of my childhood, and I will always have a fondness for the show. While I don't have the reach that they've had over the years, I like to think in my own way, I've been able to help some of these more obscure films, both the good and the bad, resurface and find a new audience.